if Aunt Veronica had not opened her gift early that Christmas Eve. My father's lake house and my entire life would belong to my stepmother by now. I thought I was just handing over a red box wrapped in paper. But when she tore off the gold bow, the room full of wealthy relatives went dead silent. Inside was not a present, but proof of exactly what she had done to me just 2 hours prior. My name is Carly Webb, and standing in the foyer of my Aunt Veronica's sprawling estate, I felt less like a guest and more like a soldier infiltrating enemy lines in a silk dress. The air inside the house smelled of expensive pine, cinnamon, and the distinct, crisp scent of old money that seemed to permeate the very drywall of the Blake residence. Outside, the snow was coming down in thick, heavy sheets, burying the suburbs of Denver under a foot of white silence, but inside, the noise was overwhelming. Crystal glasses clinked against one another. Laughter erupted in orchestrated bursts, and the low hum of jazz filtered through the high ceilings of the great room. It was the perfect picture of an upper-crust American Christmas, the kind you saw on greeting cards sent by people who owned summer homes in the Hamptons. But my skin felt too tight for my body. I adjusted the cashmere shawl draped over my shoulders, pulling it tighter around my neck. To anyone watching, it was just an elegant accessory to match my deep, wine-colored evening gown, a shade selected specifically because it was dark enough to absorb shadows. To me, the shawl was a shield. Beneath the soft fabric, along the curve of my collarbone, and down my upper arm. My skin was blooming with fresh purples and ugly yellows. They were the kind of marks that throbbed in time with your heartbeat, a dull, sick ache that reminded you of your own fragility. I had covered the fainter ones on my face with layers of color corrector and foundation, blending until I looked like the porcelain doll everyone expected me to be. But the deep bruise on my shoulder was screaming under the weight of the fabric. I took a sip of sparkling water, my hand trembling just enough to make the ice cubes chime against the glass. I needed something stronger, but I needed my head clear more. Across the room, standing by the 12-foot fir tree that grazed the cathedral ceiling, was my stepmother, Cynthia Whitaker. She was holding court, surrounded by 3 of my second cousins and a local judge, radiating the grief-stricken yet brave widow persona she had perfected over the last 6 months. She wore emerald green velvet, her blonde hair coiffed into a soft, angelic halo. If I did not know better, I would have believed her performance too. She looked fragile. She looked kind. Then her eyes locked onto mine. The warmth in them did not reach the pupils. It was a flat, shark-like gaze that communicated a singular message: keep your mouth shut. She excused herself from her circle and glided toward me. The room seemed to shrink as she approached. My instinct was to step back, to retreat toward the heavy oak front doors and run into the snow. But I forced my feet to remain planted on the Persian rug. I was 29 years old. I ran Northline Equity Group. I managed millions of dollars in assets. I would not let this woman see me flinch. "There she is," Cynthia cooed, her voice pitched loud enough for the nearby relatives to hear. "Daddy's brilliant girl. Look at you. Carly, you look stunning, even if you do look a little tired." She reached out, her manicured hands going for a hug. I stiffened, but I did not pull away fast enough. Her arms went around me, and then, with a precision that could only be intentional, her fingers dug hard into my bruised shoulder. Pain shot down my arm like an electric current. It took everything in me not to gasp. My vision blurred for a second, white spots dancing in the periphery, flashing me back to the study in my father's house only 4 hours ago. I could still hear the sound of my head hitting the desk. I could still hear her screaming that I was ungrateful. "So good to see you, Cynthia," I managed to say, my voice tight. She squeezed harder, her thumb pressing directly into the center of the inflammation, before releasing me with a pat that looked affectionate but felt like a warning. "Relax, honey," she whispered, her lips close to my ear, the smell of her floral perfume making my stomach turn. "It is Christmas. Let us not ruin Veronica's night with your drama." She pulled back, smiling brightly at a passing waiter as she grabbed a glass of champagne. I was just telling everyone how hard you have been working. It is a wonder you made it tonight." I watched her walk away, my shoulder throbbing, hatred burning a hole in my chest so hot I thought it might melt the snow outside. She thought she had won. She thought the physical lesson she had taught me earlier that evening had cowed me into submission. I turned my gaze toward the Christmas tree. Nestled deep among the piles of silver and gold packages was a square box wrapped in simple red paper. A gold ribbon was tied around it, and a small tag read, "To Aunt Veronica." It looked innocent. It looked like a scarf, or maybe a rare first edition book, the sort of thoughtful, expensive gift I usually gave. I swallowed hard. That box was the only weapon I had left. "Carly, darling!" The booming voice of my Aunt Veronica cut through the jazz. She was marching toward me, a force of nature in a silver sequined suit that cost more than my first car. Veronica Blake was a titan in Denver real estate, a woman who chewed up contractors and zoning boards for breakfast. She had loved my father fiercely, but since his death, a wall had gone up between us. She thought I was cold. She thought I was burying my grief in my investment firm, prioritizing spreadsheets over family connection. She did not know I was drowning. "Aunt Veronica," I said, managing a genuine smile. I loved her. I just did not know if she would believe me. "You look thin," she stated bluntly, looking me up and down with critical affection. "Are you eating? Or just swallowing market reports?" "I am eating, Aunt V, just busy." "You and your father," she sighed, shaking her head. "Both married to the grind. Arthur never knew when to stop, either." At the mention of my father, Cynthia materialized at Veronica's elbow as if summoned by a spell. It was terrifying how good she was at this. "Oh, Veronica, do not scold her," Cynthia said, linking her arm through my aunt's. "Carly is just ambitious. Arthur always worried about that. Of course, he used to tell me late at night how he feared the stress would break her. That is why he wanted me to take over the management of the lake house and the rest of the portfolio, to unburden her." My blood ran cold. She was doing it right now. She was rewriting history in real time, planting the seeds of incompetence so that when she stole everything, it would look like mercy. "Is that so?" Veronica asked, glancing at me. "Arthur never mentioned that to me. He always said Carly had a mind like a steel trap." "Well," Cynthia lowered her voice, feigning intimacy. "Toward the end, his memory was not what it used to be, and he wanted Carly to have her freedom. The lake house is so much work to maintain. I just want to honor his wishes." I bit the inside of my cheek until I tasted iron. Liar. "We can discuss the estate later," Veronica said, waving her hand dismissively, though I saw a flicker of fatigue in her eyes. She was tired of the grief, tired of the administration of death. That was what Cynthia was counting on, that everyone would be too exhausted to fight her. I looked at the red box again. I needed Veronica to open it. I needed her to see the truth before Cynthia could poison the well any further. I started, my voice wavering slightly. "I put a gift for you under the tree, Aunt V, the red one. I was hoping you might open it tonight." Veronica followed my gaze to the box. She laughed, a hearty booming sound. "Oh, that one? I saw it. It looks so heavy and serious. Carly, knowing you, it is probably a dissertation on the housing market." It is important," I pressed, ignoring the sharp look Cynthia shot me. "You are always so intense," Veronica teased, patting my cheek. Her hand came dangerously close to a bruise I had covered with concealer. "Tell you what, I am having such a lovely time with the champagne and the music right now. I think I will save the serious gifts for tomorrow morning. We can open it over coffee when it is just family." My heart dropped into my stomach. "No." I wanted to scream. "No, you cannot wait. By tomorrow morning." Cynthia could have already spun a dozen lies. By tomorrow morning, my nerve might break. By tomorrow morning, the bruises might fade just enough to look like accidents. "Are you sure?" I asked, sounding desperate. "It is sort of time-sensitive." Cynthia let out a high, tinkling laugh. Time sensitive? Honestly, Carly, relax. Let your aunt enjoy her party. You are so demanding. Veronica smiled at me, but her eyes were firm. Cynthia is right. Dear, let us not rush. Christmas morning is for opening presents. Tonight is for celebration. She turned away to greet a senator who had just walked in, leaving me standing there with Cynthia. Cynthia stepped closer, her voice dropping to a whisper that sounded like a hiss. You are trying too hard. It is pathetic. Go have a drink and stop embarrassing yourself. I felt the walls closing in, the heat of the fireplace, the smell of heavy perfume, the noise of 50 conversations overlapping. It was suffocating. I needed air. I turned on my heel and walked briskly toward the French doors at the back of the room. I slipped through them, stepping out onto the expansive stone patio. The cold hit me like a physical blow, shocking and clarifying. It was 10 degrees below zero, and the snow was falling in silence, covering the manicured gardens in a blanket of white. I walked to the edge of the stone railing, gripping the cold metal with my bare hands, welcoming the bite of the frost. Behind me, through the glass, the party looked like a scene from a movie I was not starring in. Golden light, happy people, ignorance. They did not know a monster was drinking their champagne. Please, I whispered to the empty, snowy dark. Please, Aunt Veronica, do not wait until morning. I looked down at my hands gripping the rail. On my left wrist was my smartwatch. The screen was shattered, a spiderweb of cracks obscuring the digital face. It looked like junk. It looked like I had been clumsy and smashed it against a doorframe. I ran my thumb over the jagged glass. It had broken when my wrist slammed into the mahogany desk in my father's study, the force of Cynthia's shove sending me flying. But that crack was not just damage, it was the trigger. The impact had activated the emergency recording feature. I closed my eyes, the phantom pain in my shoulder throbbing in the cold air. Inside that red box was a USB drive and a letter. But inside this broken watch was the voice of the devil herself. If Veronica did not open that box tonight, I would have to find another way to make them listen, because I was not going to let Cynthia Whitaker steal my father's legacy, not while I was still breathing. The cold air on Aunt Veronica's patio bit into my lungs, but the chill I felt radiating from my bones had nothing to do with the Denver winter. It was a ghost of a feeling, a phantom limb of a life that had been amputated slowly, slice by slice, over the last 9 years. To understand why I was standing outside shivering in a silk dress with a cracked smartwatch on my wrist, you have to understand the warmth I had lost. You have to understand the house that built me, and the woman who dismantled it brick by brick. My father, Arthur Whitaker, was not born into money like the Blakes. While Aunt Veronica turned family capital into a real estate empire, my father built his life with sawdust in his cuffs and calluses on his palms. He ran a small construction firm, the kind where the owner is the first one on the site and the last one to leave. He worked 18-hour days for years, missing dinners and school plays, all for one singular, obsessive dream, the lake house. It was a cabin up near Grand Lake, Colorado. It was not a mansion. It was a sprawling, cedar-shingled embrace of a home with a wraparound porch that looked out over water so still it mirrored the sky. I was 10 years old when he finally bought it. I remember him picking me up, spinning me around until I was dizzy, and telling me that this was our fortress. He said that the city was for working, but the lake was for living. Those early Christmases were the golden hour of my life. Dad and I would drive up to Aunt Veronica's estate, this very house I was standing outside of now, and it felt like a royal summons, but without the stiffness. Back then, Veronica was not just the intimidating matriarch. She was the cool aunt who snuck me sips of wine and debated stocks with me as if I were an adult. I remember one Christmas Eve when I was perhaps 15. We were sitting by the fire. Dad, Veronica, and me. The adults were drinking brandy, and the air smelled of wood smoke and expensive chocolate. You know, Arthur, Aunt Veronica had said, gesturing with her crystal glass, You are building that construction company well, but you need to diversify. Let me manage a portfolio for you. You keep the lake house as your sanctuary, but let the money work for itself." Dad had laughed, that deep, rumbling laugh that used to make me feel safe. "Veronica, you manage the millions. I will keep the lake house. And Carly here? She is going to be smarter than both of us. She will inherit the brains to run the business and the heart to keep the house." The lucky girl of the family, Veronica had toasted, clinking her glass against my soda can. "With your father's grit and my killer instinct." I believed them. I believed I was part of an unbreakable triangle. I did not know then that triangles are the most unstable structures when pressure is applied to the wrong point. The pressure arrived when I turned 20. Her name was Cynthia. At first, I did not see the cracks forming. Cynthia did not sweep in like a villain from a fairy tale with a poisoned apple. She came in with casseroles, soft cardigans, and a listening ear. She was a paralegal at a firm my father had done contracting work for. She was beautiful in a way that felt approachable, not intimidating. When they got married, I was just starting to get serious about my finance degree. Cynthia positioned herself as my biggest cheerleader. She would take me out for coffee and ask about my classes. She would say things like, "Your father is so old-fashioned. Carly, he does not understand that a modern woman needs a career, but I get it. I am so proud of you." She played the role of the hip, supportive older sister perfectly. She encouraged me to take summer internships in New York and Chicago, pushing me to chase my ambitions. I thought she was being selfless. I thought she wanted me to fly. I did not realize she was just clearing the runway so she could be the only pilot in my father's life. The shift was so subtle that if you blinked, you missed it. It started about 2 years into the marriage. I would come home for a weekend, excited to share news about a promotion or a successful trade I had made, and Cynthia would smile a tight, sad little smile. "That is wonderful. Carly," she would say, patting my hand. "But maybe do not talk about money too much around your dad tonight. He has been feeling a little lonely. He thinks you only care about the portfolio, not him." I was crushed. I immediately dialed back, trying to be more present, asking about his garden, his woodworking, but the seed was planted. Cynthia would whisper to him when I was not in the room. She would tell him I was too busy to come to Sunday dinner, even when I had never been invited. She would say I was stressed and snapping at her, so he would walk on eggshells around me. By the time I was 25, the narrative had solidified. In my father's eyes, I had become Carly the workaholic, the cold financier who loved her career more than her family. And Cynthia? She was the martyr. She was the only one who took care of him, the only one who truly understood his simple needs. The isolation of Aunt Veronica was her masterstroke. "Veronica is so intimidating," Cynthia would say to Dad, shivering theatrically. "She makes me feel so small. Arthur, and she is always so busy with her galas and her deals. Let us not bother her this Christmas. Let us just have a quiet one. Just us." Just us eventually meant just them. The invitations to Aunt Veronica's house became fewer. The phone calls dwindled. Cynthia acted as the gatekeeper, filtering messages, forgetting to pass along voicemails. She painted Veronica as a judgment-passing elite who looked down on their simple love, driving a wedge between the siblings that had never existed before. The first time I truly felt the cold steel of her ambition was 3 years ago. We were at the lake house for Thanksgiving. The air was crisp, the water a perfect steel gray. Dad was looking older, his heart condition beginning to slow him down. We were eating dinner when Cynthia placed her hand over Dad's and said, "Arthur, honey, I have been thinking. This house, it is so much work for you, the maintenance, the taxes. Maybe we should think about asset optimization." I froze, my fork hovering halfway to my mouth. "Asset optimization? What are you talking about?" Cynthia turned to me, her eyes wide and innocent. "Well, Carly, you of all people should understand. The market is high. If we sell the lake house now, we could put that money into a trust. It would be safer for your father's retirement." "Sell the house?" I looked at Dad. "Dad, You built this deck with your own hands. You said this was the one thing we would never sell. Dad looked tired. He looked from me to Cynthia. It is a lot of work. Carly, Cynthia is worried about my heart. She ends up doing so much of the cleaning. I will hire a service, I interrupted, my voice rising. I will pay for the maintenance. Do not sell it. See, Cynthia sighed, looking at Dad with pity. She is always throwing money at problems. She does not understand that it is about the emotional burden. Arthur, she just wants to keep the asset. I want to keep our home, I snapped. That night, the tension in the cabin was suffocating. I went to the kitchen to get a glass of water late at night and heard voices coming from the master bedroom down the hall. The door was cracked open an inch. Update the will. Arthur. Cynthia's voice was low, urgent. It did not sound like the gentle wife anymore. It sounded precise. If something happens to you, the tax implications of the current structure are a nightmare. You need to simplify. Put the control in one place so I can manage it for us. Carly is smart with this stuff, Dad mumbled, sounding half asleep. She should be the executor. Carly is a shark. Arthur? Cynthia hissed. The venom in her voice shocked me into stillness. She would sell this place out from under me the second you are gone, just to put the cash in her hedge fund. She does not care about me. She barely cares about you. I am the one who is here. I stepped back, the floorboard creaking under my foot. Silence fell inside the room. A second later, the door yanked open. Cynthia stood there in her silk robe. Her face was shadowed, but her eyes caught the moonlight. There was no warmth, no fake sisterly affection. She looked at me with pure, unadulterated loathing. She knew I had heard. Eavesdropping? She whispered. That is beneath even you. Carly. You are trying to cut me out, I whispered back, my hands shaking. You are lying to him about me. Cynthia stepped into the hallway, closing the bedroom door behind her to block Dad from hearing. She leaned in close, her breath smelling of mint and rot. He believes what he sees, Carly, and all he sees is a daughter who comes around once a month to critique his finances, and a wife who washes his clothes and cooks his meals. Who do you think he trusts? Go back to bed. This does not concern you anymore. From that night on, the war was open. Though silent, she stopped pretending to like me when we were alone. She restricted my access to the house, changing locks because she lost the keys. She intercepted mail. But the most painful moment, the memory that I clung to like a lifeline as I stood on Aunt Veronica's patio, was a conversation I had with Dad just 2 weeks before he died. I had managed to catch him alone in the garden while Cynthia was at the store. He looked frail, his skin papery. We sat on a bench, watching the wind rustle the aspen trees. Dad, I had said softly, I feel like I'm losing you. I feel like I do not know where I fit in this family anymore. He reached out and took my hand. His grip was weak, but his eyes were clear for the first time in months. You are my daughter, Carly. Nothing changes that. Not papers, not marriages. But the will, I started. He squeezed my hand. Listen to me. Cynthia worries a lot. She needs security. But I know you. I know who you are. He looked at me with an intensity that frightened me. No matter what I leave behind on paper, Carly, I believe in you. I believe you are smart enough to protect what matters. You always figure it out. You are the builder now. I do not understand, I said, tears stinging my eyes. If you are worried, why don't you fix it? It is complicated, he whispered, looking toward the driveway as if afraid Cynthia would appear. Just remember, you are smart enough to protect it. I thought he was just being a senile old man trying to comfort me. I thought he was capitulating to her to keep the peace. I did not realize until tonight, until the violence in the study, that he was giving me a command. He knew he was trapped. He knew he had signed things he should not have, and he was leaving it to me to fight the war he had already lost. Standing in the snow outside Aunt Veronica's party, I finally understood. He did not leave me a fortune. He left me a puzzle. And tonight, with the bruise throbbing on my shoulder and the red box under the tree. I was finally placing the first piece. The funeral passed in a blur of black wool and suffocating lilies. My father died on a Tuesday morning, his heart giving out before the ambulance could even clear the driveway. By Friday, he was in the ground, and I was watching Cynthia perform the role of her life. She stood at the graveside, leaning heavily on the arm of the priest, a delicate, trembling figure in designer mourning wear. She accepted condolences with a grace that made everyone whisper about her strength. She cried exactly the right amount, enough to evoke pity, but not so much that it ruined her mascara. I stood 10 feet away, dry-eyed and hollowed out, feeling like a ghost haunting my own father's burial. People patted my arm and murmured generic comforts, but their eyes always drifted back to Cynthia. She was the tragedy. I was just the daughter who had arguably been too busy to visit enough. The real knife in the back, however, did not come until 3 days later. It happened in the dining room of the house where I had grown up. The long mahogany table was clear of the funeral meats and casseroles, replaced by stacks of cream-colored legal paper. The air was stale, smelling of old coffee and the leather of briefcases. Fraser Cole, a senior partner at Cole & Redding, sat at the head of the table. He was a man my father had trusted for 20 years, a man who had helped Dad navigate zoning laws and permit applications when his construction business was just getting off the ground. Now, he wouldn't even meet my eyes. He kept shuffling papers, his hands nervous, his tie slightly askew. Cynthia sat to his right, looking composed. Aunt Veronica sat across from her, her face unreadable behind a pair of dark reading glasses she hadn't taken off since entering the house. "Shall we begin?" Fraser asked, his voice scraping against the silence. I nodded, gripping my hands together in my lap. "Please, Fraser, let us just get this over with." "Very well." He cleared his throat and picked up the document on top of the pile. "This is the last will and testament of Arthur James Whitaker, dated October 15th of this year." My head snapped up. "October 15th? That was only 2 months ago." "Yes," Fraser said, looking at the paper rather than me. "Your father came into the office to update his estate planning. He felt urgency." "He was sick," Cynthia interjected softly, her voice laced with sadness. "He knew his heart was weak. Carly, he wanted to make sure everything was in order." I felt a prickle of unease at the back of my neck. 2 months ago. Dad had been tired, yes, but he hadn't seemed desperate. Fraser began to read. The legal jargon washed over me, heavy and dull, until the specific bequests began. "To my wife, Cynthia Whitaker, I leave the primary residence at 4200 Oakwood Drive, along with all its contents, furnishings, and personal effects." That was expected. The house was theirs. I did not want the house. "To my wife, Cynthia Whitaker, I also leave the entirety of my liquid assets, savings accounts, and life insurance policies, to be used for her maintenance and care." I blinked. Entirety? Dad had always told me there were specific bonds set aside for me, remnants of my mother's life insurance that he had invested. "Regarding the property known as the Lake House in Grand Lake," Fraser continued, his voice monotone, "I hereby grant full managerial control and executive power of attorney over the property to Cynthia Whitaker. The title shall remain in the family trust, with Cynthia Whitaker acting as the sole trustee with the power to liquidate, leverage, or transfer said asset as she deems necessary for the financial health of the estate." The room went silent. "Wait," I said, the word coming out like a cough. "Managerial control, sole trustee, what about me?" Fraser flipped a page. "The will stipulates that upon Cynthia's passing, any remaining assets in the trust shall pass to you. Carly, however, during her lifetime, she has full discretion." "That is not right," I said, my voice rising. I looked at Cynthia. "Dad told me 1,000 times. The lake house was ours. He said, explicitly, that it was never to be sold. He said I was to be the co-owner." Cynthia sighed, a long, weary sound that suggested I was being difficult. "Oh, Carly, We discussed this. Your father changed his mind. He was worried about you. Worried about me? I laughed, a harsh, jagged sound. I run a private equity firm. Cynthia, I know how to manage an asset. He felt you were overwhelmed, Cynthia said, smoothing the tablecloth with her manicured hand. He told me he didn't want the lake house to be another burden on your schedule. He wanted you to be free to focus on your little company. He wanted me to handle the heavy lifting of the property management. This isn't about property management, I snapped. This is about ownership. This will give you the power to sell it tomorrow if you wanted to. And why would I do that? Cynthia asked, her eyes widening in mock offense. It was Arthur's favorite place. I would only ever do what is best for the family. I turned to Fraser. This contradicts everything he ever told me. Where is the previous will? The one from 5 years ago? This document supersedes all previous wills, Fraser said stiffly. It is legally binding. Carly. I want to see it, I demanded. Fraser slid the document across the polished wood. I pulled it toward me, my hands trembling with a mixture of rage and grief. I scanned the dense paragraphs, the dry language stripping away my father's legacy line by line. Then my eyes landed on the signature at the bottom of the final page. It was my father's name, Arthur James Whitaker, but it was wrong. My father had a bold, architectural signature. He signed his name like he was laying a foundation. Heavy strokes, sharp angles, a distinct loop on the W. The signature on the paper before me was weak. The lines were wavering, trailing off at the end. The slant was different, leaning backward instead of forward. It looked like the writing of a man who was either heavily medicated or having his hand guided by someone else. This signature, I whispered. Fraser, look at this. This barely looks like him. He was failing, Carly, Cynthia said quickly. His hands shook. It was hard for him to hold the pen. It broke my heart to watch him sign it, but he insisted. I looked up at Aunt Veronica. She had been silent this entire time, reading her own copy of the document. She was the one person in this room who knew my father as well as I did. She knew his handwriting. She knew his promises. Aunt V, I said, pleading with my eyes. Look at this. You know this isn't right. Dad would never cut me out of the lake house decision-making. He promised. Veronica lowered the paper slowly. She took off her reading glasses and looked at me. Her expression was unreadable, a mask of stone. It is a legal document, Carly, Veronica said, her voice flat. Fraser, did you witness the signing? I did. Fraser nodded, though he shifted in his seat. Myself and my paralegal witnessed it here, in this room. Veronica looked at the signature again. She traced the line of it with her gaze, her brow furrowing slightly. For a second, I thought she was going to slam her hand on the table and demand an explanation. I thought she was going to stand up and fight for me. Instead, she put her glasses back on. It seems to be in order, she said. The betrayal hit me harder than the will itself. My mouth fell open. Are you serious? You are going to let her take the lake house? That place is half yours in spirit. Veronica, Dad built the deck for you. The law does not care about spirit, Carly, Veronica said, her voice turning cold. It cares about ink. If Arthur signed it, and Fraser witnessed it, then it is what it is. Perhaps your father really did think you were too busy. She stood up, smoothing her skirt. I need to make a call. Excuse me. She walked out of the room, leaving me alone with the shark and her lawyer. I looked back at the signature. It was grotesque. It looked like a forgery, or worse, a coercion. But without Veronica's backing, without proof, I was just a disgruntled daughter complaining about her inheritance. I do not accept this, I said to Cynthia. Cynthia stood up as well, walking over to where I sat. She placed a hand on my shoulder, a heavy, possessive weight. It does not matter if you accept it. Honey, it is done. You have your own money. You have that Northline Equity Group. Focus on that. Let the adults worry about the estate. I am 29 years old, I hissed, shrugging her hand off. I am an adult. Then act like one, she smiled, ice in her eyes. Stop making a scene over paper. She turned to Fraser. "Thank you, Fraser. I think we are done here." I stood up, my legs shaking. "I want to see his study. I want to see his personal papers. Maybe he left a letter. Maybe he left something explaining this insanity." "The study is closed," Cynthia said immediately. "It is my father's study. I have a right to—" "Actually, you do not," she cut me off. "The house is mine now, and the study is currently under audit. I have accountants coming in to inventory the business assets for tax purposes. It is a mess in there. I cannot have you rummaging through and disturbing their workflow." "Auditing?" I scoffed. "Dad's business was small. It does not take a team of accountants to inventory it." "It does when you want to be thorough," she said. "I had the locks changed this morning to ensure security." "You changed the locks?" "Standard procedure," Fraser mumbled, closing his briefcase. I looked from one to the other. The conspiracy felt thick in the air. A physical weight pressing against my chest. They had planned this. They had circled the wagons before the dirt was even settled on his grave. I turned and walked out of the dining room, down the hallway toward the study. It was at the back of the house, a room that smelled of cedar and tobacco, where Dad had taught me how to read blueprints. I reached for the brass handle. It was locked. I jiggled it, desperation rising in my throat. I tried to turn it again, harder this time. As if force of will could overcome the mechanism, it held fast. I pressed my forehead against the cool wood of the door. I could picture the room inside, the leather chair, the drafting table, the framed photos of us at the lake. It was all right there, inches away, but I was on the outside. For the first time in my life, I was not Arthur Whitaker's daughter in this house. I was a trespasser. I traced the keyhole with my finger. She had locked me out. She had stolen his voice, warped his wishes, and now she was barring me from his memory. "You will not get away with this," I whispered to the wood. But as I stood there in the silent hallway, with the murmur of Cynthia and the lawyer laughing softly in the dining room, I felt a terrifying certainty that she already had. I was alone. The smartwatch on my wrist buzzed with a notification from work, a reminder of the life Cynthia claimed was the reason for my dispossession. I ignored it. I did not leave the door. I just stood there, memorizing the feeling of helplessness, letting it harden into something cold and sharp in the pit of my stomach. If they wanted to play legal games, if they wanted to use ink and paper to erase me, I would have to learn to read between their lines. The signature was wrong. I knew it, and staring at that locked door, I swore I would find the key that opened the truth, even if I had to burn the whole house down to find it. The notification that unraveled the entire scheme arrived on a Tuesday afternoon, buried between a market analysis report and a calendar invite for a board meeting. It was a simple email error, the kind caused by an autofill feature on an overworked clerk's computer. The sender was Lakeside Title Services, a firm I had never hired, but the subject line froze the blood in my veins. Whitaker Lake House Transfer Packet. Urgent. I clicked it open, my hand hovering over the mouse. My email address was in the carbon copy field. Likely a mistake because my name was still associated with the property tax records from when I handled my father's bookkeeping years ago. The attachment was a PDF. I opened it, and the world tilted on its axis. It was a loan application and a title transfer document. The borrower listed was Cynthia Whitaker. The collateral was the lake house. The loan amount was staggering, $500,000 against a property that my father had owned outright for 15 years. But the most damning part was the line for owner. It listed Cynthia Whitaker as the sole owner. My name was nowhere to be found. I picked up the phone, my fingers trembling with a rage so cold it felt like ice water in my veins. I dialed Cynthia. "Hello?" Her voice was light, airy, as if she were arranging flowers. "What are you doing with the lake house, Cynthia?" I asked, skipping the pleasantries. "I just got an email from Lakeside Title." There was a pause on the line, a silence that lasted exactly 3 seconds, the time it took for a liar to calibrate their story. "Oh, that," she sighed, the sound heavy with performed exhaustion. "I did not want to worry you with this. Carly, it is just administrative cleanup. the medical bills from your father's last days. They are astronomical. The estate is cash poor right now. I have to leverage the house to pay the doctors. Unless, of course, you want your father's legacy to be debt? Dad had excellent insurance, I countered, my eyes scanning the document on my screen. Medicare plus a platinum supplemental plan. There is no way he owes $500,000 in medical bills. There were out-of-network specialists, she said, her voice hardening. Experimental treatments we tried at the end. You were not there, Carly, so you do not know the costs. Do not be heartless. I am trying to clean up the mess so we can all move on. Send me the invoices, I said. I will pay them myself. Do not mortgage the house. It is already in process, she snapped. Stop micromanaging me. You are becoming obsessive. She hung up. I did not stop. I was an investment banker. Due diligence was my religion. I spent the next hour pulling every explanation of benefits statement from my father's insurance portal, to which I still had the password. I built a spreadsheet in 10 minutes. I tallied every copay, every deductible, every denied claim from the last 6 months of his life. The total came to roughly $12,000. She was taking out a loan for $500,000. The math was not just wrong, it was criminal. She was not paying bills. She was liquidating the equity in the house to pocket the cash, likely planning to default on the loan later and let the bank foreclose, washing her hands of the property while keeping the money. I needed to see the source document. I needed to see how she had convinced a title company that she had the authority to do this when the probate period had barely begun. I picked up my office phone and dialed the number in the email signature from Lakeside Title Services. I deepened my voice, adopting the crisp, professional tone of an executive assistant. Good afternoon. This is Sarah calling from Mrs. Whitaker's office, I lied smoothly. We are reviewing the draft contract for the Lake House transfer, and Mrs. Whitaker is concerned that the power of attorney document she sent over might have been the older version. Could you forward the one you have on file just so we can verify the dates? Oh, certainly, the clerk said, sounding helpful. I have the scan right here. It is the one dated December 10th. Sending it now. December 10th. My father died on December 14th. The email pinged. I opened the file. It was a power of attorney form, granting Cynthia full control over all real estate transactions. I scrolled to the bottom to find the signature. I gasped, the sound loud in my empty office. The signature was a disaster. My father's hand had been shaking in his final days. Yes, but this was jagged, distorted. The A in Arthur was split in two, as if the pen had lifted and been forced back down. The loops were erratic. It looked like the writing of a man who was barely conscious, or perhaps the writing of a man whose hand was being forcibly held and dragged across the paper by someone else. It was coercion, or it was a forgery. I printed everything: the email, the insurance spreadsheet, the loan application, and the jagged signature. I shoved them into a leather portfolio and drove straight to Aunt Veronica's estate. I found her in her greenhouse, trimming orchids. The air was humid and smelled of earth. Aunt Veronica, I said, breathless, slamming the portfolio onto the potting table. You have to look at this, now. She wiped her hands on her apron and looked at me. Her expression guarded. She opened the folder. I watched her eyes scan the documents. I waited for the explosion. I waited for the lioness of the Blake family to roar, to pick up the phone and destroy Cynthia with a single call to her lawyers. She read the insurance numbers. She studied the loan application. She stared at the signature for a long time. Then, she closed the folder. This is disturbing, she said quietly. Disturbing? I shouted, waving my hands. It is fraud. She is stealing the lake house and lying about medical bills. Look at that signature. Dad did not sign that willingly. You can see the struggle in the ink. Veronica looked at me, her blue eyes piercing. She did not look angry. She looked sad. Carly, she said, her voice low, if you pursue this, if you accuse her of forging a signature or coercing a dying man, you are starting a war that will tear the family apart. You are accusing his widow of a felony. She is a criminal. She is a manipulator, Veronica corrected. Proving she is a criminal is a different burden. She stepped closer, placing a hand on my arm. I need you to answer me honestly. Are you doing this because you want the house, or are you doing this because you want justice for Arthur? Both, I said. It is what he wanted. Are you sure you are ready to go all the way? She asked. The question felt heavy, loaded with a meaning I could not quite parse. Because once you pull this thread, the whole tapestry comes down. There is no going back to Sunday dinners. I do not want dinner with her, I spat. I want her out of our lives. Veronica nodded slowly. Then leave these copies with me. I need to think. I need to verify a few things on my own channels. Do not confront her again yet. Wait, I felt a surge of betrayal. She is closing that loan next week. I said give me time, Veronica ordered, her voice regaining its steel. Trust me, Carly. I left her house feeling more alone than before. Why was she hesitating? Was she afraid of the scandal? 2 days later, Cynthia showed up at my office at Northline Equity Group. She did not make an appointment. She breezed past my receptionist, wearing a white cashmere coat that probably cost more than my first car. She walked into my office and closed the door behind her. We need to talk, she said, sitting down without being invited. She placed a manila envelope on my desk. What is this? I asked, not touching it. A peace offering, she said, smiling that tight, shark-like smile. I know you are upset about the lake house. I know you think you have some sort of claim to it. I do not think, I said. I know. Regardless, she waved her hand, I do not want us to fight. Your father would hate that. So, I have come up with a solution. She tapped the envelope. Inside is a draft agreement. If you sign a waiver releasing any and all claims to the Whitaker estate and the lake house, and agreeing to a non-disparagement clause, I will personally transfer $200,000 from the life insurance payout directly into your investment fund. Seed money, no strings attached. I stared at her. You are trying to bribe me? I am trying to help you, she said, her eyes cold. You are a businesswoman. Carly, the house is an emotional asset. It drains cash. This is liquid capital, $200,000. Think of what you could do with that. It was an admission of guilt. If her paperwork was solid, if the will was ironclad, if the power of attorney was real, she would never offer me a dime. She was terrified. She knew I had the lakeside documents. She knew I was circling. So that is the price of my father's legacy? I asked quietly. $200,000? It is a generous offer, she said. Take it, walk away, let me handle the house. I reached out and took the envelope. I opened it, pulled out the agreement, and looked at it. It was thick with legal jargon, designed to gag me forever. I looked Cynthia in the eye. Then, slowly, deliberately, I ripped the document in half, then in quarters. Get out of my office, I said. Cynthia's face changed. The mask of the benevolent stepmother vanished, replaced by a look of pure, unadulterated malice. She stood up, her hands clenching into fists at her sides. You are making a mistake, she hissed. You think you are smart, Carly. You are just a little girl playing dress-up in her daddy's business. You have no idea what I am capable of. I am not signing, I said, standing up to meet her glare. And I am going to stop that loan. We will see about that, she said. Be at the house on Christmas Eve. We will settle this final matter then, but do not expect another offer. You just declared war. She turned and stormed out. I looked at the torn pieces of paper on my desk, my heart hammering against my ribs. I had refused the bribe. I had cornered the animal, and as I watched the snow fall outside my office window, I had no idea that the violence she had threatened was not just legal or financial. I had pushed her over the edge, and she was waiting for me on Christmas Eve to make me pay for it. The sun was beginning to dip below the horizon on Christmas Eve, casting long, bruised shadows across the snow when I pulled up to my father's house. It was supposed to be a time of peace, a few hours of calm before the extravagance of Aunt Veronica's annual party. Instead, my stomach was twisted into a tight, nauseous knot. Cynthia had texted me an hour earlier, a simple, imperative message. "Come to the house. We need to settle this before we go to Veronica's. I do not want bad energy at the party." I walked through the front door without knocking. The house was silent, but it did not feel empty. It felt like a trap waiting to be sprung. The hallway smelled of cinnamon and expensive potpourri, a cloying scent that tried too hard to mask the absence of the man who had built these walls. In the study, Carly, her voice floated out, cool and detached. I walked down the hall to the room she had locked me out of just days ago. The door was open now. Inside, a small, tastefully decorated Christmas tree twinkled in the corner, its white lights reflecting off the dark wood paneling, but the room felt freezing. The fire was unlit. The leather chair behind the massive mahogany desk, my father's chair, was empty. Cynthia was standing by the window, staring out at the driveway. She turned as I entered, her face composed, her makeup flawless. She gestured to the desk. "Sit," she said. "I will stand," I replied, crossing my arms. "What do you want, Cynthia?" She walked over to the desk and picked up a blue folder. She slid it across the polished wood toward me. "I had Fraser draw up a final document," she said, her tone devoid of emotion. "It is a complete release. You sign this, acknowledging that the lake house is mine to manage, that the investment portfolio is under my sole discretion, and that you have no claim to the estate beyond the personal items already in your possession." I looked at the folder, then at her. "And if I do not?" "Then we do this the hard way," she said, shrugging slightly. "I will tie up the probate for years. I will drain the estate accounts on legal fees fighting you. By the time you see a penny, the lake house will be rotting into the water and the money will be gone. Or you sign this, and we go to Veronica's party like a happy family." I stepped forward. Reaching into my purse, I pulled out the envelope containing the evidence I had gathered, the email from Lakeside Title, the loan application, and the magnified scan of the forged signature. I threw it onto the desk, right on top of her blue folder. The papers fanned out, the damning Cynthia Whitaker signature staring up at us. "I am not signing anything," I said, my voice shaking with suppressed rage. "And neither are you. I know about the loan. Cynthia, I know you are leveraging the house for $500,000, and I know you forged his signature on the power of attorney document." Cynthia looked down at the papers. She did not gasp. She did not recoil. She simply reached out and flipped the loan application over, as if it were a boring magazine article. "You really have been busy," she said softly. "I spoke to the clerk at Lakeside," I pressed, stepping closer. "That signature is dated 4 days before he died. He was in a morphine coma. Cynthia, he could not hold a spoon, let alone sign a legal document transferring property rights. You guided his hand, or worse, you just traced it." Cynthia's face changed. The mask of the grieving, elegant widow cracked and fell away, revealing something ugly and jagged underneath. Her lips curled into a sneer. "So what if I did?" she spat. The sudden volume of her voice made me jump. "Do you have any idea what it was like? Changing his sheets? Listening to him moan? I took care of him. Me, not you. That does not give you the right to steal his legacy." "Legacy?" She laughed, a harsh, barking sound. "You spoiled, ungrateful brat. You think you are entitled to everything just because you share his DNA? You lived off him your whole life. He paid for your college. He paid for your car. He set you up in that fancy investment firm. And now, when he is gone, you want to strip the shirt off his widow's back too?" "This is not about money," I yelled back. "It is about the house he built. It is about the fact that you are lying." "You are a greedy little leech, Carly," she hissed, walking around the desk, closing the distance between us. Her eyes were wide, manic. "You never loved him. You just loved what he could give you. And now you are trying to take what is mine." "I am taking this to the police," I said. turning toward the door. "I am done talking to you." "No!" The word was a shriek. Before I could take a second step, her hand clamped onto my upper arm. Her grip was shocking, iron hard and desperate. She yanked me backward with a strength I did not know she possessed. I spun around, losing my balance. My hip collided hard with the sharp corner of the heavy mahogany desk. I cried out as pain shot down my leg, my arms flailing to catch myself. My left arm slammed onto the surface of the desk, the face of my smartwatch striking the wood with a sickening crack. I did not have time to check it. Cynthia was on me. She shoved me, her hands pressing into my chest, forcing me back until my shoulder blades hit the bookshelf. Books and framed photos rattled, one crashing to the floor. "You are not going anywhere," she screamed, her face inches from mine. "You are not ruining my life." "Get off me," I gasped, trying to push her away. She slapped me. It was not a theatrical slap. It was an open-handed blow that connected with the side of my jaw with a wet, meaty sound. My head snapped to the side. My ear rang. I stood there, stunned, my hand flying to my cheek. I was 29 years old. I was a CEO. I was standing in my father's study, and my stepmother had just struck me like I was an unruly child. "You think you can intimidate me?" she seethed, grabbing the lapels of my coat and slamming me against the shelves again. The wood dug into my spine. "You think anyone is going to believe you over me? I am the grieving widow. You are the estranged, work-obsessed daughter who barely visited." "Let go!" I choked out, grabbing her wrists. Her nails dug into my skin through the fabric of my dress. "If you say one word to Veronica," she growled, shaking me, her spittle hitting my face. "If you show those papers to anyone, I will destroy you. I will tell everyone you are having a breakdown. I will tell them you are off your meds. I will tell the police you attacked me in a grief-induced psychosis and I had to defend myself." She slapped me again, harder this time, across the other cheek. My lips split against my teeth. I tasted the copper tang of blood. "Do you hear me?" she screamed, her face contorted into a mask of pure hatred. "You are unstable. You are delusional. No one will listen to you." She shoved me one last time, hard enough that I slid down the front of the bookcase and collapsed onto the Persian rug. My head spun. My cheek throbbed with a pulse of fire. My shoulder, where she had grabbed me, ached with a deep, bruising pain. Cynthia stood over me, her chest heaving, her hair slightly disheveled. She smoothed her skirt, taking a deep, shuddering breath. She looked at me with disgust, as if I were a stain on the carpet. "Clean yourself up," she said, her voice dropping back to that terrifyingly calm register. "Put some makeup on. We are leaving for Veronica's in 20 minutes, and if you look anything less than perfect, I will have you committed." She turned and walked out of the study, slamming the heavy oak door behind her. The silence that followed was deafening. I lay on the floor for a moment, staring at the ceiling, trying to remember how to breathe. My body was shaking uncontrollably, a reaction to the adrenaline and the shock. I touched my lip. My finger came away red. I rolled onto my side, groaning as my bruised hip protested. My hand brushed against the floor and hit my wrist. I looked down at my watch. The screen was shattered. A spiderweb of cracks obscured the digital face where it had impacted the desk. It looked destroyed. But then I saw it. A faint, pulsing green light on the side of the casing. My heart stopped, then hammered a double beat. I knew that light. I had set up the safety features on this watch myself when I bought it for running alone at night. It had a fall detection setting. If it registered a hard impact, like slamming against a mahogany desk, and I did not dismiss the alert within 10 seconds, it automatically began an emergency recording. My trembling fingers hovered over the cracked screen. I tapped the side button, praying the internal processor was still functional. The screen flickered, distorted by the broken glass, but the audio file was there. Recording saved. Today, 4:12 p.m. I pressed play. The sound was tinny but crystal clear in the silent room. Crack. Then, Cynthia's voice, distorted by rage but unmistakable. "You are not going anywhere. You are not ruining my life." The sound of the slap, thwack. "You think anyone is going to believe you over me? I am the grieving widow. If you say one word to Veronica, I will tell everyone you are having a breakdown. I will tell the police you attacked me." I sat up, ignoring the pain in my body. The tears that had been threatening to fall evaporated, replaced by a cold, sharp clarity. She thought she had beaten me. She thought that by bruising my skin and threatening my sanity, she had silenced me. She thought that because there were no witnesses in this room, her version of the truth would become the only version. But she was wrong. I looked at the watch, then at the door where she had exited. I wiped the blood from my lip with the back of my hand. I was not going to the police station. Not yet. That would be her word against mine. And she was a master manipulator. No, I needed a judge. I needed a jury. And tonight, at Aunt Veronica's house, the entire family would be assembled. I slowly pulled myself up from the floor, clutching the broken watch to my chest like a holy relic. I would fix my makeup. I would put on my dress. I would wrap my bruised neck in a scarf. And I would walk into that party with a smile on my face. Because I was not bringing a gift to Aunt Veronica anymore. I was bringing an execution. I sat in the driver's seat of my car, parked 2 streets away from my father's house, and stared at my reflection in the rearview mirror. The interior light was unforgiving. It highlighted the swelling beginning to bloom on my left cheekbone and the small, jagged cut on my lip where the skin had split against my tooth. My hands were trembling, not from fear, but from the residual adrenaline of survival. I reached into the glove compartment and pulled out a packet of wet wipes. I cleaned the blood from my mouth with methodical precision, wincing as the alcohol stung the raw flesh. I did not cry. Crying was a luxury for people who were safe. I was not safe. I was in a war zone, and I had just survived the first skirmish. I looked at the shattered smartwatch on my wrist. It was no longer just an accessory. It was the black box of a plane crash. I opened my laptop, which I always kept in my bag. I tethered it to my phone's hotspot, my fingers flying across the keyboard. The first rule of investment banking is risk management. You never keep your assets in one place, especially when they are volatile. I connected the watch to the laptop. The screen flickered, but the data transfer cable held. I pulled the audio file, the sickening sound of the slap, the threats, the admission of the forgery, and uploaded it immediately to a secure, encrypted cloud server. I did not stop there. I took photos of my face, the bruising on my shoulder, and the red marks on my arm with my phone, uploading those as well. I scanned the physical documents I had stolen back from the desk, the email from Lakeside Title, the loan application, the jagged signature, using a portable scanner app. Within 10 minutes, every piece of evidence was stored in a server located in Switzerland, protected by a 20-character password. Even if Cynthia ran my car off the road, even if she physically destroyed my laptop and phone, the truth was already in the ether. But cloud storage would not help me tonight. Tonight, I needed something tangible. I reached into my briefcase and found a spare USB drive I used for client presentations. I wiped it clean and transferred the folder named Christmas Eve onto it. The file transfer bar filled up. Green, steady, inevitable. Next came the narrative. Evidence is useless without context. I took out a legal pad and a fountain pen. I did not write a diary entry. I did not write a tearful plea for pity. I wrote a timeline. December 10th. Power of attorney signed. Allegedly by Arthur Whitaker. Signature shows signs of coercion. December 14th. Arthur Whitaker passes away. December 20th. Loan application filed by Cynthia Whitaker with Lakeside Title Services, using the house as collateral. December 24th. 4 o'clock in the afternoon. Confrontation in the study. Cynthia admits to the loan and forgery. Physical assault occurs. Threats of false imprisonment made. I wrote calmly, my handwriting sharp and angular. I concluded the letter with a single, direct instruction. If you believe I am exaggerating, or if you think this is just a family dispute, please listen to the audio file on this drive before you trust another word Cynthia says. The file is named The Truth. I folded the letter around the USB drive. Now the delivery mechanism. I had a gift box in the back seat, a spare present I had intended for a colleague but never delivered. It was a sturdy box wrapped in deep crimson paper with a gold ribbon. It looked expensive. It looked innocent. It looked like the kind of generic, high-end gift a niece gives an aunt she respects, but isn't overly close to. I carefully undid the ribbon, opened the box, and removed the scented candle inside, tossing it into the passenger seat. I placed the USB drive and the letter into the velvet-lined interior. I closed the lid and retied the bow. It was perfect. It was a Trojan horse wrapped in holiday cheer. Before I started the engine, I made one phone call. It was Christmas Eve. But Elena Price never stopped working. She was a partner at Harborstone Legal, a shark of an attorney I had met at a Women in Finance summit 2 years ago. We had stayed in touch, bonding over our shared intolerance for incompetence. Carly, her voice was sharp, professional, despite the holiday. This is unexpected. I need 5 minutes. Elena, I am sending you a link to a secure folder. I need you to look at the documents and listen to the audio file inside, right now. I am at a dinner. Carly. Elena, please. It involves probate fraud, forgery, and assault, and I'm about to walk into a room with the perpetrator. The line went silent for a moment. Send it. I waited. The minutes ticked by. Snow piled up on the windshield. I watched the digital clock on the dashboard change from 5:15 to 5:22. My phone buzzed. I listened to the first 2 minutes, Elena said. Her voice was no longer casual. It was cold, hard steel. Jesus, Carly, are you safe? I am fine. I need to know the legal standing. If that audio is authenticated, and the metadata will prove it is, you have grounds for an immediate emergency injunction to freeze the estate. Elena rattled off, her lawyer brain engaged. The forgery on the power of attorney is clumsy, but the audio is the nail in the coffin. She admits to the scheme. She threatens you with false imprisonment. That is extortion. And the assault? That is criminal battery. Can we stop the loan on the lake house? We can stop everything, Elena promised. I can have a motion drafted by tomorrow morning. But Carly, you need to get out of there. Do not go back near her. She is volatile. I cannot leave, I said, staring at the red box on the seat beside me. She is going to Aunt Veronica's party. She is going to spin a story that I am crazy before I can even file a motion. If I let her control the narrative tonight, I might lose the family support I need to fight this. So what is the plan? I am going to the party, I said, and I am going to let Veronica be the judge. That is risky, Elena warned. If Veronica doesn't open that evidence, or if Cynthia intercepts it, she won't, I said. I am going to make sure of it. I hung up. I felt a strange sense of calm settle over me. The fear was gone. In its place was the cold, calculating logic that made me good at my job. I checked my face one last time. I applied a fresh layer of concealer over the bruise on my cheek, blending it until it was just a shadow. I reapplied my lipstick. I arranged my scarf so it covered the marks on my neck but looked like a fashion statement. I put the car in drive and headed toward the estate. The drive was a blur of snow and taillights. When I arrived at Aunt Veronica's, the driveway was already packed with luxury SUVs. I parked, took a deep breath, and grabbed the red box. Walking into that house felt like walking onto a stage. The heat, the noise, the smell of pine. It was all exactly as I had anticipated in my mind. But now the stakes were lethal. I saw Cynthia immediately. She was already there, holding a glass of champagne, laughing with the bank manager. She looked radiant. No one would ever guess that 40 minutes ago she had been screaming like a banshee and slamming my head into a desk. I moved through the crowd, clutching the red box. I needed to get it under the tree without her seeing me place it, but I also needed to make sure it was visible enough that Veronica wouldn't miss it. I waited until Cynthia turned her back to greet a cousin. I slipped past a waiter carrying a tray of crab cakes and knelt by the towering fir tree. I placed the red box front and center, right on top of a pile of silver packages. I angled the tag that read, "To Aunt Veronica," so it caught the light. My heart was hammering against my ribs. This was the gamble. If Veronica waited until tomorrow morning to open this, Cynthia would have all night to poison the waters. She would pull Veronica aside, whisper lies about my instability, and by the time morning came, the letter in that box would look like the ravings of a lunatic. I needed Veronica to open it tonight. I stood up and smoothed my dress. I saw Cynthia spot me from across the room. Her eyes narrowed. She scanned me, looking for the bruises, looking for the fear. I gave her nothing. I held her gaze, my face a mask of bored indifference. She smiled, a terrifying, triumphant little twitch of her lips, and turned back to her conversation. She thought I was broken. She thought I was here to surrender. She had no idea that the red box sitting 10 feet away from her was not a gift. It was a bomb, and the timer was already ticking down. All I had to do was wait for someone to strike the match. The great room of the Blake estate was a masterclass in intimidation masquerading as hospitality. Under the vaulted ceilings, the air was thick with the scent of roasted prime rib, expensive cologne, and the hushed, electric murmur of deals being struck between mouthfuls of canapes. This was not just a family gathering. In the Whitaker and Blake bloodline, Christmas was a networking event. The room was populated by the people who mattered in Denver. Partners at major law firms, angel investors, real estate moguls, and the kind of old money that did not need to shout because it whispered in the ears of senators. I moved through the crowd like a ghost in my wine-colored dress, my hand clutching a glass of sparkling water so tightly I feared the stem might snap. I had reapplied my makeup in the car, layering concealer over the bruise blooming on my cheekbone, and arranged my silk scarf to hide the marks on my neck. To the casual observer, I was just Carly, the quiet investment banker niece. But every time someone looked at me, I felt the phantom sting of Cynthia's hand across my face. Cynthia was working the room with the precision of a predator in a tank of slow-moving fish. She wore her widowhood like a couture gown, dramatic, elegant, and designed to elicit sympathy. I watched from near the fireplace as she placed a hand on the arm of Uncle Marcus, a retired judge who had always had a soft spot for my father. She leaned in close, her voice pitched perfectly to carry just enough for the surrounding circle to hear. "It has been so hard on her," Cynthia murmured, casting a sad, concerned glance in my direction. "The grief is manifesting in strange ways. Arthur's death really broke her. Marcus, she is throwing herself into work at Northline, barely sleeping. I am worried she is starting to lose her grip on reality a little bit. She imagines slights where there are none." Marcus nodded gravely, looking at me with pity. "Poor girl. Burnout is a terrible thing." "I try to get her to slow down," Cynthia sighed, taking a sip of her champagne. "But she gets so defensive, paranoid, even, it breaks my heart." I bit the inside of my cheek until I tasted iron. She was brilliant. She was inoculating them against me. By painting me as the exhausted, paranoid workaholic beforehand, she ensured that any accusation I made later would be viewed through the lens of my alleged instability. If I screamed, "She hit me," they would hear, "She is having a breakdown." I turned away, needing to escape her performance, but I bumped right into a conversation that made my blood run cold. Standing near the hors d'oeuvres table was my cousin Miles, a senior vice president at a downtown investment bank, talking to Cynthia, who had seemingly teleported to his side. Miles was sharp, ambitious, and exactly the kind of person who would notice a bad loan application, unless he was charmed into ignoring it. "The lake house is a beautiful asset," Cynthia, Miles was saying, holding a bacon-wrapped date. "But looking at the market right now, leveraging it is a bold move. Are you sure Arthur would have wanted that kind of debt on the estate?" I froze, feigning interest in a poinsettia arrangement so I could listen. Cynthia laughed, a light tinkling sound. "Oh, Miles, you know how conservative Arthur was. But we have to look forward. I am thinking of diversifying the capital. I spoke to Carly about it. Of course, she agrees that the equity is just sitting there doing nothing. We are on the same page about pulling out $500,000 to reinvest. It is just that, well, Carly is too emotional to handle the paperwork right now, so I am taking the lead. Carly agreed to leverage the lake house? Miles sounded skeptical. That does not sound like her strategy. She usually holds real estate long term. She is not herself. Miles. Cynthia lowered her voice to a conspiratorial whisper. She says yes one day, no the next. It is the stress. I am just trying to execute what we discussed on her good days. It is a smart financial move. Do you not think? To free up that cash for the medical debts? Medical debts? Miles frowned. I thought Uncle Arthur had the platinum plan. There were complications, she lied smoothly. Hidden costs. Just trust me. Miles, I am doing this to save the estate, not drown it. I wanted to step in. I wanted to grab Miles by the lapels and scream that she was lying, that the medical debts were a fiction and the reinvestment was theft. But I stayed rooted to the spot. If I confronted her now, with no proof, I would just be the hysterical stepdaughter she had warned everyone about. I would be proving her point. I looked toward the Christmas tree. The red box was there, buried under a mountain of silver and gold. It was silent. It was patient. That box was the only thing that could speak louder than Cynthia's lies. The evening wore on, a slow parade of torture. The children of my various cousins were running through the great room, a blur of velvet dresses and miniature bow ties. They laughed and shrieked, tearing into early stocking stuffers, completely oblivious to the tension radiating from the adults. Their joy felt surreal, a layer of bright, innocent varnish over a rotting piece of wood. I watched a little girl, no older than 5, hug Cynthia's legs. Cynthia smiled down at her, stroking the child's hair with the same hand that had slammed my head into a desk 4 hours ago. The cognitive dissonance made me nauseous. Then came the moment that almost broke my resolve. Aunt Veronica called for everyone's attention. She stood by the fireplace, looking regal in her silver suit, holding a champagne flute. The room quieted down. I want to make a special toast, Veronica announced, her booming voice filling the space. To family, and specifically, to the new head of the Whitaker household. She gestured to Cynthia. My stomach dropped. Arthur is gone, Veronica continued, her face unreadable. But he left behind a strong woman to carry his torch. Cynthia, I know the last few months have been a nightmare of administration and grief. I want you to know the family supports you. Veronica reached into her pocket and pulled out a slip of paper. It was a check. I am making a donation of $50,000 to the charity you mentioned last week, in your name, Veronica said, handing it to Cynthia, to help you get started with your philanthropic goals. Applause broke out, polite, wealthy applause. Cynthia accepted the check, wiping a tear from her eye. Oh, Veronica, she choked out. You are too generous. Arthur would be so happy to see us united like this. I felt like the floor had opened up beneath me. Veronica had just publicly endorsed her. She had just handed Cynthia $50,000. Had she not looked at the documents I brought her? Did she not care about the forgery? Or had she decided that family reputation was more important than the truth? I felt a touch on my arm. It was Cynthia. She had moved through the applause to find me, the check clutched in her hand like a weapon. See, she whispered, her voice barely audible over the clapping. She loves me. You are all alone. Carly, why do you not just go home? No one wants you here. I looked at her. I looked at the bruise hidden under her makeup that matched the one under mine. I am not leaving, I said calmly. We have not opened gifts yet. Cynthia's eyes narrowed. You are a glutton for punishment. Maybe, I said, or maybe I just like surprises. I walked away from her and went straight to the tree. The pile of gifts was diminishing as the children raided the lower levels, but the adult exchange was just beginning. I reached down and picked up the heavy red box. I walked over to where Aunt Veronica was standing, accepting compliments on the hors d'oeuvres. Aunt V, I said, interrupting a conversation she was having with a senator's wife. Veronica turned to me. Her eyes were cool, detached. She did not look like my ally. She looked like the formidable matriarch who had just written a $50,000 check to my abuser. "Carly," she said, "having a good time?" "I wanted to give you this," I said, holding out the red box. My hands were shaking, and I hated myself for it. "I know you said you wanted to wait until morning, but please, take it now." Veronica took the box. It was heavy in her hands. She looked at the tag. "It is substantial," she noted dryly. "It is," I said, holding her gaze. "Dunt Veronica, you can open it whenever you see fit, but I am asking you, I am begging you, to believe that everything inside is the truth, no matter what you have heard tonight." Cynthia appeared at my elbow instantly, sensing the shift in the atmosphere. "What is this?" Cynthia asked, her voice light, but her eyes sharp on the box. "Another present? You are so mysterious tonight. Carly, is it a photo album? Or maybe some financial reports you want Veronica to review?" She reached out as if to touch the box. "Do not touch it," I said. The sharpness of my tone caused the senator's wife to blink in surprise. Cynthia recoiled, putting a hand to her chest. "My goodness, so aggressive. I was just joking." "It is a personal gift," I said to Veronica, ignoring Cynthia. "Please." Veronica looked from me to Cynthia, then down at the box. For a second, I thought she was going to hand it back to me. I thought she was going to say, "Not now. Carly, stop causing a scene." Instead, she placed the box on the mantelpiece, behind a garland of holly. "Thank you, Carly," Veronica said evenly. "I will keep it safe." She turned back to the senator's wife. "Now, about that zoning issue in the warehouse district." I was dismissed. The next 2 hours were an eternity. The party dragged on toward midnight. The jazz band played slower. More melancholy tunes. Guests began to check their watches. I stood in the corner, nursing my warm water, watching the red box sit on the mantelpiece. It was right there, in plain sight. But Veronica ignored it. She laughed with guests. She ate fruitcake. She seemed to have forgotten I existed. Panic began to set in. The plan was failing. If the party ended and everyone went home, Cynthia would stay. She would be alone with Veronica. She would find out what was in the box and destroy it, or talk her way out of it before the evidence could be aired. I needed witnesses. I needed the shock of the public revelation to keep Veronica from sweeping it under the rug. My phone buzzed in my clutch. It was a text from Elena. "My lawyer. Motion is drafted. We file at 8 a.m. Get out of there." I could not go. Not yet. People started to retrieve their coats. The noise in the room lowered as the crowd thinned. Cynthia was at the door, playing the gracious hostess, kissing cheeks, and wishing everyone a Merry Christmas. She looked triumphant. She had survived the night. She had humiliated me. She had secured the money. I took a step toward the door. Defeated. I would have to rely on the courts. It would be messy. It would take years. "Wait." The single word cut through the room like a gavel strike. It was Aunt Veronica. She was standing in the center of the Persian rug, the lights of the Christmas tree casting a halo around her silver hair. She was not looking at the guests who were leaving. She was looking at the mantelpiece. "Before anyone else leaves," Veronica said, her voice loud and commanding, "there is one more thing. It is Christmas Eve, after all, and I promised my niece I would give her gift the attention it deserves." The room went silent. The half-dozen guests still putting on their coats stopped. Cynthia froze near the doorway, her hand halfway raised in a wave. "Veronica," Cynthia said, her smile faltering slightly. "It is late. Surely we can do gifts tomorrow?" "No," Veronica said. She walked to the mantelpiece and picked up the red box. "I think this one needs to be opened tonight, before the clock strikes 12, before this Christmas passes into history." She turned and looked at me. Her expression had changed. The coolness was gone, replaced by a terrifying, focused intensity. "Carly," she said, "you asked me to believe you." She walked to the center of the room, holding the red box like it was a grenade she intended to detonate. "Let us see what you have to say." Cynthia took a step forward, her face draining of color. "Veronica, really, this is unnecessary." "Quiet, Cynthia," Veronica snapped. It was the first time all night she had dropped the polite facade. Veronica pulled the gold ribbon. It came undone with a soft hiss of fabric. She tore the red paper. My heart hammered against my ribs so hard, I thought it would crack them. This was it. The trap was sprung. Veronica lifted the lid. The silence that descended on the great room was not the peaceful quiet of a snowfall. It was the suffocating, heavy silence of a vacuum, sucking the oxygen out of the lungs of every person standing there. The jazz band had stopped playing. Sensing the shift in atmospheric pressure, 50 well-heeled guests stood motionless, champagne flutes suspended halfway to their mouths, their eyes locked on the red box in Aunt Veronica's hands. My heart was hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I stood near the wall, my hands clasped so tightly behind my back that my knuckles were white. This was the moment. I had pushed all my chips to the center of the table. Veronica's movements were deliberate. She was not tearing into the gift with the joy of Christmas morning. She was dismantling it with the precision of a forensic analyst. She untied the gold ribbon, the silk whispering against the paper. She lifted the lid. Cynthia was standing 10 feet away, her smile fixed and brittle, like a crack in a windshield that was about to shatter. Her eyes darted from the box to Veronica's face, then to the guests, then back to the box. She took a half step forward, her instincts screaming at her to intervene, but the social contract of the room held her in place. You do not snatch a gift from the hostess. Veronica reached into the box and pulled out the letter. It was 3 pages long, handwritten on yellow legal paper. My handwriting was usually neat, but on those pages, it was jagged, rushed, fueled by adrenaline and pain. Veronica adjusted her glasses. She began to read. I watched her face. For the first paragraph, she remained impassive, the cool mask of the business tycoon firmly in place, but as her eyes scanned down the first page, where I detailed the email from Lakeside Title and the loan application, her brow furrowed. A small, vertical line appeared between her eyes. She flipped to the second page. This was the part about the forgery. Her lips pressed into a thin, white line. She flipped to the third page, the assault, the threats. The color drained from Veronica's face. She did not look at me. She did not look at Cynthia. She just stared at the paper, her hand trembling ever so slightly. "Oh, for heaven's sake!" Cynthia's voice cut through the silence, high and shrill. She laughed, but it sounded like glass breaking in a garbage disposal. "She has written you a novel, hasn't she? Honestly, Veronica, you know how Carly gets. She probably wrote some dramatic manifesto about how I changed the drapes in the study. It is just—" Veronica raised her hand. She did not look up. She did not shout. She simply held up her palm, fingers flat, in a gesture of absolute command. "Silence," Veronica said. The word was spoken at normal volume, but it carried the weight of a gavel. Cynthia's mouth snapped shut. Her face flushed a mottled red. Veronica finished reading. She folded the letter slowly, creased it with her thumbnail, and placed it back in the box. Then, she reached in and pulled out the silver USB drive. She held it up to the light. The small label I had attached read, "Only for those who want the truth." Veronica looked around the room until she spotted Leo, my 20-year-old cousin who was studying computer science. "Leo," she said, her voice steady, "plug this into the television, now." "Aunt V." "Really?" Cynthia tried again, taking a step toward her. Panic was starting to bleed through her foundation. "This is a party. We do not need to look at Carly's work files or whatever that is. It is inappropriate." Veronica turned her head slowly to look at Cynthia. The look in her eyes was one I had never seen directed at a family member. It was the look she gave to people she was about to bankrupt. "If it is just work files, Cynthia, then you have nothing to worry about." Veronica said, "Leo, do it." Leo took the drive, looking nervous, and walked over to the massive 80-inch screen mounted above the fireplace. He plugged it into the side port. The screen flickered from a festive fireplace loop to a stark blue file directory. 2 folders appeared, audio and images. "Play the audio first," Veronica commanded. Leo clicked the remote. The speakers in the great room were top of the line, designed for immersive cinema. When the audio file began to play, it did not sound tinny or distant. It sounded like we were standing inside the study. Crack! The sound of the smartwatch hitting the desk echoed through the room like a gunshot. Several guests flinched. Then, Cynthia's voice filled the room. It was not the honey-sweet voice she had been using all night. It was a guttural, animalistic snarl. "You are not going anywhere. You are not ruining my life." The sound of a scuffle, heavy breathing, and then the sickening, wet thwack of a hand striking flesh. I closed my eyes. Hearing it again was physically painful. I felt the phantom sting on my cheek. The room had gone so quiet, I could hear the ice melting in the punch bowl. "You think anyone is going to believe you over me? I am the grieving widow. You are the estranged, work-obsessed daughter." The recording continued. Every threat, every gaslighting phrase, every admission of her plan to paint me as mentally unstable was broadcast in high definition to the very people she had been lying to just 20 minutes ago. "If you say one word to Veronica, I will tell everyone you are having a breakdown. I will tell the police you attacked me." The audio ended. For 3 seconds, no one moved. No one breathed. The cognitive dissonance was shattering in real time. They looked at the woman standing in the green velvet dress, the woman they had toasted, the woman they had pitied, and then they heard the monster on the recording. Then, slowly, heads began to turn. One by one, 50 pairs of eyes swiveled toward Cynthia. She was standing frozen, her hand clutching her pearl necklace. Her face was a mask of pure terror. She opened her mouth to speak, but nothing came out. "Open the images," Veronica said. Her voice was ice. Leo clicked the remote again. The first image filled the screen. It was a selfie I had taken in the car just an hour ago. The lighting was harsh, revealing the purple-yellow bruising blooming on my cheekbone and the split lip. I felt the gaze of the room shift to me. I was standing in the shadows, but I lifted my chin. I let the scarf around my neck fall loose, revealing the finger-shaped bruises on my throat where she had grabbed my collar. I heard a gasp from my cousin Miles. He looked from the screen to me, his eyes widening as the reality of what he was seeing sank in. Leo clicked to the next image. The email from Lakeside Title Services. The loan amount, $500,000. The borrower, Cynthia Whitaker. The bankers in the room leaned forward. They understood this language. They saw the numbers. They saw the fraud. Leo clicked again, the side-by-side comparison of the signatures. On the left, my father's bold, architectural signature from a year ago. On the right, the shaky, distorted scribble on the power of attorney document dated 4 days before his death. "That is a lie!" Cynthia screamed. The sound tore through the tension. She lunged toward the TV, as if she could physically block the pixels with her body. "It is a lie," she shrieked, spinning around to face the room. Her eyes were wild. "She faked it. She used AI. You know how she is with computers. She hates me. She cut that audio together. It is a deep fake." She looked at Uncle Marcus, desperate for an ally. "Marcus, you know me. You know I loved Arthur. I would never hurt her. She attacked me. She is the one who is crazy." Uncle Marcus took a step back, recoiling from her as if she were contagious. "Cynthia," Veronica said. She stepped into the center of the room, placing herself between Cynthia and the guests. "It is a setup. Veronica," Cynthia pleaded, grabbing Veronica's arm. "You cannot believe this. That recording. It is not real." Veronica looked down at Cynthia's hand on her silver sleeve. She did not shake it off. She simply looked at it with profound disgust until Cynthia, trembling, pulled her hand away. "Cynthia," Veronica said. her voice ringing clear and authoritative against the stone walls. I have been reviewing contracts for 40 years. I have seen every trick, every forgery, and every scam in the book. She pointed at the screen, at the jagged, pathetic signature. I sat by Arthur's bedside 3 days before he died. He could not lift a glass of water. He certainly could not exert the pressure required for that downstroke on the W. Veronica leaned in, her face inches from Cynthia's. I recognize a guided hand when I see one, and I recognize the voice of a woman who is terrified of losing her meal ticket. Do not insult my intelligence by claiming this is AI. You are not that important, and Carly is not that cruel. Cynthia stammered, tears streaming down her face now. Ugly, panicked tears that garnered no sympathy. I was just trying to protect the estate. Protect it? Veronica laughed, a harsh, mirthless sound. You were leveraging it. You were stealing it. Veronica turned away from her, addressing the entire room. She stood tall, the matriarch reclaiming her territory. I apologize to everyone for ruining the party, Veronica said, her voice shaking with suppressed rage. But it seems we have a situation that cannot wait until morning. She gestured to the screen, where the evidence of my father's stolen legacy still glowed blue and white. Tonight, we are not just celebrating Christmas, Veronica declared. We are witnesses. We are witnessing exactly who in this family has been beating my brother's daughter, and we are witnessing an attempt to steal the inheritance of a man who worked himself into an early grave to build it. She looked back at Cynthia, who was now standing alone in a circle of empty space, as the guests had instinctively backed away to the walls. You are done, Cynthia, Veronica said. You are absolutely done. The silence in the room was not empty. It was heavy, pressing down on us like a physical weight. The image of the forged signature still glowed on the television screen, a neon accusation that no amount of social grace could smooth over. Dr. Eris Thorne, my second cousin and a chief of trauma surgery at Denver Health, broke the stillness. He did not ask for permission. He simply walked out of the crowd, his face grim, and approached me. Carly, he said, his voice low but audible in the pin-drop silence. Let me see. I hesitated for a fraction of a second, then lowered my hand, allowing the silk scarf to fall completely away from my neck. I tilted my head back. Aris stepped closer, his professional demeanor taking over. He gently touched the side of my jaw, tilting my face toward the light of the chandelier. He inspected the split in my lip and the darkening purple bruise that was beginning to spread down my collarbone where Cynthia's fingers had dug in. He turned to the room. He did not look at Cynthia. He looked at Aunt Veronica. These injuries are less than 6 hours old, Eris stated flatly. There is distinct swelling on the zygomatic arch consistent with a blunt force impact, likely an open hand given the surface area, and the marks on her neck are contusions from fingers. Someone grabbed her, hard, and shoved her backward. This matches the audio recording perfectly. It was the first domino. The medical confirmation stripped away the last possibility that this was a deepfake or a fabrication. Cynthia let out a strangled noise, a sound between a sob and a scream. He is lying. He always liked her better. You are all ganging up on me. Enough, Aunt Veronica said. She pulled her phone from her pocket and placed it on the marble coffee table in the center of the room. She dialed a number and hit the speaker button. Elena Price. The voice answered on the first ring. It was sharp, alert, and terrifyingly competent. Elena, you are on speaker, Veronica said. Her eyes locked on Cynthia. The entire family is here. We have reviewed the evidence Carly provided, the audio, the photos, the documents from Lakeside Title. I have the motion for a temporary restraining order and an emergency freeze on the estate assets drafted. Elena's voice filled the room, crisp and undeniable. Based on the evidence of physical assault and the admission of fraud on the tape, we are also preparing a referral to the district attorney's office for criminal battery and forgery. I can have a judge sign the injunction to stop the loan on the lake house by 9 o'clock tomorrow morning. Cynthia's face went from pale to a blotchy, furious red, The legal reality was closing in on her, and she reacted like a trapped animal. "You snake!" she screamed, lunging toward me. Two of my male cousins stepped in front of me instantly, blocking her path. She stopped, panting, her hands curled into claws. "You planned this!" she shrieked, pointing a shaking finger at me over my cousin's shoulder. "You ungrateful, greedy little snake! You never cared about your father. You were never there. You were too busy chasing money in the city while I changed his diapers. And now you want to steal everything he left me?" She spun around, appealing to the crowd, her eyes wide and manic. "She is doing this for the money," Cynthia yelled. "Look at her. She is jealous that Arthur loved me. She is trying to stage a drama to cheat a widow out of her inheritance. Miles, you know how hard I worked. You know I took care of him." For a second, the sheer volume of her emotion made the room waver. I saw a few of the older relatives exchange uncertain glances. They were people who avoided conflict at all costs. They wanted to believe that this was just a messy misunderstanding, a hysterical fight between a stepmother and a daughter that had gotten out of hand. "Maybe we should not be so hasty," one aunt murmured. "It is Christmas. Perhaps they just need to cool down." Veronica did not argue. She simply picked up the remote control from the table. She rewound the audio file. She pressed play. "If you say one word to Veronica, I will tell everyone you are having a breakdown. I will tell the police you attacked me. No one will believe you." The threat hung in the air, cold and calculated. It was not the voice of a victim. It was the voice of a predator planning to destroy a reputation to cover a crime. The aunt who had spoken closed her mouth. The sympathy in the room evaporated instantly. Veronica stepped forward. She looked like a judge passing a final sentence. "There will be no cooling down," Veronica said. "Elena, proceed with the filing. I want the estate frozen. I want the lake house locked down. And I am authorizing you to represent Carly in a civil suit for damages against Cynthia Whitaker." "Understood," Elena said. "I will call the clerk." Veronica hung up the phone. She turned to Cynthia, who was now trembling, her back against the fireplace mantel. "Furthermore," Veronica said, reaching into the pocket of her blazer, she pulled out the check for $50,000 she had given Cynthia earlier that evening. "I am canceling this." She ripped the check in half, then in half again, and let the pieces flutter to the floor. "I will also be removing my backing from the Whitaker Foundation," Veronica continued, her voice relentless. "And I will be calling every board member in Denver tomorrow morning to explain exactly why. I will not have the Blake or Whitaker name associated with a woman who beats her stepdaughter and then tries to gaslight the entire family into thinking the victim is insane." "You cannot do that," Cynthia whispered, her voice cracking. "I am his wife. The will. The will says the house is mine to manage." "Actually," a gravelly voice spoke up from the back of the room. We all turned. It was Silas Moore, a retired estate attorney and one of my father's oldest friends. He had been standing quietly by the window, nursing a scotch, watching the entire scene unfold with sad, tired eyes. He walked forward, reaching into the inside pocket of his tweed jacket. "Arthur sent me something," Silas said slowly. "About 6 months ago, before he got really sick. He sent a copy to Veronica too, though I suspect she never opened it because Arthur told her to keep it sealed unless something went wrong." Veronica frowned. "The envelope in the safe? He told me it was just sentimental letters." "It was not," Silas said. He pulled out a folded document. "It is a holographic codicil, a handwritten amendment to his will, signed and notarized by his bank manager on a day when you, Cynthia, were out of town at a spa weekend." Cynthia went white. "That is not possible." "Arthur knew he was losing his grip," Silas said, his voice thick with emotion. "He knew you were pressuring him to change things. He told me he was afraid he would sign something just to get some peace and quiet. So he wrote this." Silas unfolded the paper. "It states that the lake house in Grand Lake is to be held in a construct of joint tenancy with right of survivorship between Cynthia Whitaker and Carly Webb. However," Silas paused, looking over his spectacles at Cynthia, "it contains a be an actor clause. It specifically states that the property is inviolable and cannot be sold, mortgaged, or leveraged without the written consent of both parties. And if one party attempts to encumber the asset without the consent of the other, or is found to have acted against the interest of the co-owner, their executive rights are immediately forfeited. The room gasped. It was the fail-safe. My father had not been weak. He had been playing a long game, protecting me from beyond the grave in the only way he knew how. He knew, I whispered, tears finally spilling over. He told me I was smart enough to protect it. He knew I would find out. Silas nodded at me. He knew you would fight for it, Carly, and he made sure you had the ammunition. Cynthia stared at the paper in Silas's hand, the loan she had applied for, the money she was counting on, the power she thought she held. It all disintegrated in seconds. She had committed fraud to sell a house she did not even fully own. "This is a conspiracy," she mumbled, but the fight was gone from her voice. "You all planned this. You are all against me." "We are against abuse, Cynthia," Veronica said, "and we are against theft." Veronica walked over to the front door. She opened it wide. The cold wind from the blizzard outside swirled into the warm room, carrying snowflakes that melted on the Persian rug. "You are leaving," Veronica said. "What?" Cynthia looked up, startled. "It is a blizzard. You cannot throw me out." "You have a car," Veronica said, "and I suggest you start driving before the police arrive, because once Elena files that motion in the morning, the locks on the main house are going to be changed, and you are going to need to find a hotel anyway." I left my coat in the coat room," Cynthia stammered. "Someone get her coat," Veronica ordered. One of the cousins ran to fetch the white cashmere coat. He thrust it into Cynthia's arms. She stood there, clutching it, looking around the room for a single sympathetic face. She looked at Uncle Marcus. He looked away. She looked at Miles. He took a sip of his drink. She looked at the children, who had stopped playing and were watching with wide, confused eyes. Finally, she looked at me. There was no apology in her eyes, only a deep, burning hatred. "You will regret this," she whispered. "I doubt it," I said. My voice was steady. "Merry Christmas, Cynthia." Veronica stepped aside, gesturing to the open door. "Get out." Cynthia hesitated for one last second, then turned and walked out into the snow. The wind caught her hair, whipping it around her face. She stumbled slightly on the icy step, then corrected herself and marched toward her car without looking back. Veronica slammed the door shut. The heavy thud echoed through the house, a final punctuation mark to the sentence. She turned and locked the deadbolt. Then she turned to face the room. "I am sorry for the interruption," Veronica said, her voice trembling slightly now that the adrenaline was fading. "Please, everyone, continue the evening." But the party was over. The music did not start again. People began to talk in hushed, urgent tones. Veronica walked straight to me. She ignored the guests. She ignored Silas. She walked right up to me and pulled me into a hug so tight it pressed the air from my lungs. "I am so sorry," she whispered into my hair. "I am so sorry I made you wait. I am so sorry I did not see it sooner." I buried my face in her shoulder, the smell of her perfume and the safety of her embrace finally breaking the dam I had built around my emotions. "You opened the box," I sobbed quietly. "That is all that matters." "I should have opened it the moment you walked in," she said, pulling back and holding my face in her hands, her thumbs brushing away my tears. Careful of the bruise. "You are not alone, Carly. Do you hear me? You are not fighting her alone anymore. We have the lawyers. We have the will. We have the family." I looked around the room. Aris was nodding at me. Silas raised his glass. Miles gave me a tentative, apologetic smile. For the first time since my father died, the cold knot of isolation in my chest began to loosen. I touched the bandage Aris had put on my wrist. I was bruised. I was exhausted. I was going to have to fight a legal battle that would likely drag on for months. But as I looked at Aunt Veronica, standing like a shield between me and the world, I knew one thing for certain. Cynthia had taken my father's signature, but she had failed to take his family, and that was a loss she would never recover from. The wheels of justice grind slowly, but when they finally caught up with Cynthia Whitaker, they did not just grind, they pulverized. 4 months after that fateful Christmas Eve, I walked into the Denver District Court. The snow was gone, replaced by the pale, tentative green of early spring, but the air inside the courtroom was sterile and cold. I was flanked on my left by Aunt Veronica, wearing a navy suit that looked like armor, and on my right by Elena Price, who carried a briefcase thick with the destruction of my stepmother's reputation. We sat on the plaintiff's side, across the aisle. Cynthia sat with a lawyer who looked expensive but tired. She was dressed in soft pastels, trying to project the image of a fragile, grieving widow being bullied by her husband's ruthless family. She dabbed at dry eyes with a tissue every time the judge looked her way. It was a performance, but the audience had changed. This was not a cocktail party. This was a court of law. The proceedings began with a dull roar of legalese, but the tension in the room was sharp enough to cut glass. We were petitioning for a permanent injunction against the sale or mortgaging of the lake house, the removal of Cynthia as the executor of the estate, and damages for the assault. Cynthia's lawyer, a man named Mr. Sterling, opened with a narrative that made my stomach turn. "Your Honor," he said, his voice dripping with faux sincerity, "this case is a tragedy, not because of any financial malfeasance, but because it represents the persecution of a bereaved woman by a stepdaughter who feels entitled to her father's money. Ms. Webb is a successful financier. She does not need this property, her pursuit of it, and her aggressive confrontation of my client on Christmas Eve suggests a vendetta, not a quest for justice. He painted me as greedy. He painted me as unstable. He used the very words Cynthia had threatened me with in the study." Then it was Elena's turn. She did not tell a story. She presented a timeline. "Exhibit A," Elena announced, projecting the email from Lakeside Title Services onto the courtroom monitors. An application for a loan of $500,000, listing Cynthia Whitaker as the sole owner of the property in question. This application was filed on December 20th. The probate period had not even legally begun. "My client was confused by the paperwork," Sterling argued weakly. "She intended to use the funds for estate debts." "And the medical debts?" Elena asked. "We have subpoenaed the insurance records. The outstanding balance for Arthur Whitaker's care was $12,400, not $500,000, son." The judge, a stern woman with reading glasses perched on the end of her nose, made a note. She did not look impressed by the discrepancy. "Exhibit B," Elena continued, the power of attorney document used to authorize the preliminary title search. The handwriting expert took the stand. He was a dry, academic man who spoke in absolutes. He placed the scan of the shaky signature next to 10 samples of my father's writing from the year prior. "The tremor pattern here is inconsistent with a natural neurological decline," the expert testified, pointing to the jagged W in Whitaker. "See the heavy ink pooling at the top of the loops? That indicates the pen was held in place while the paper was moved, or the hand was guided by an external force. This is not a signature. It is a tracing performed under duress." Cynthia shifted in her seat. She whispered something furious to her lawyer, but he held up a hand to silence her. Then came the audio. The courtroom was silent as the recording from my smartwatch played. We had filtered out the background hiss, so the sounds were terrifyingly crisp. Thwack. The sound of the slap echoed off the high ceilings. "You are not going anywhere. You are not ruining my life. If you say one word to Veronica, I will tell everyone you are having a breakdown. I will tell the police you attacked me." I watched the faces of the people in the gallery. My relatives were there. Miles, Uncle Marcus, even Silas Moore. When the threat rang out, Uncle Marcus lowered his head into his hands. The audio stripped away the he said, she said defense. It revealed the malice. It revealed the premeditation. Cynthia did not look at the jury box. She stared straight ahead, her knuckles white as she gripped the table, her pastel performance crumbling under the weight of her own recorded venom. Next, Dr. Eris Thorne took the stand. He was clinical, precise, and devastating. I examined Ms. Webb at approximately 9 o'clock in the evening on December 24th. Eris testified. The bruising on her cheek and neck was consistent with an assault occurring within the previous 6 hours. The grip marks on her throat indicated she was grabbed with significant force by someone facing her. It was not a defensive wound. It was an attack. Mr. Sterling tried to cross-examine him. Dr. Thorne, is it not true that you are the plaintiff's cousin? Can we really trust your objectivity? I am a chief of trauma surgery, Eris replied, his voice cold. I know the difference between a bruise from a fall and a bruise from a hand, and I know the difference between a cousin and a patient. My report is objective. The injuries were real. But the final blow, the one that ended the war, was the document Silas Moore had revealed at the party. Elena approached the bench with the original copy of the holographic codicil. Your Honor, Elena said, this document was handwritten by the deceased 6 months prior to his death. It was notarized and kept in a sealed safe deposit box, only to be opened in the event of a dispute. It establishes a joint tenancy for the lake house, specifically to prevent exactly what we are seeing today. She read the clause aloud. If either party attempts to sell, leverage, or encumber this property without the express written consent of the other, or if one party is found to have acted with malice against the interests of the co-owner, their executive rights are immediately forfeited and full ownership reverts to the remaining party. The courtroom went dead silent. It was a legal booby trap, set by a dying father who knew exactly who he had married. The judge took the document. She read it. She looked at the date. She looked at the notarization stamp. Then she looked at Cynthia. Ms. Whitaker, the judge said, did you know this document existed? No, Cynthia whispered. It is a forgery. Arthur would never... The notary is listed as the branch manager of your husband's bank. The judge cut her off. We can verify this in 10 minutes, but assuming it is valid, and it certainly appears to be, your attempt to mortgage this property behind Ms. Webb's back triggers the forfeiture clause immediately. The judge banged her gavel. I am issuing a ruling, she declared. The court finds the holographic codicil valid due to the defendant's documented attempt to encumber the asset without consent and the overwhelming evidence of fraud regarding the power of attorney. Cynthia Whitaker's rights to the lake house property are hereby terminated. Full ownership is transferred to Carly Webb, effective immediately. I let out a breath I felt like I had been holding since Christmas. Aunt Veronica squeezed my hand so hard it hurt. Furthermore, the judge continued, her eyes narrowing at Cynthia, regarding the assault, based on the audio evidence and medical testimony, I am granting a permanent restraining order. Ms. Whitaker, you are to have no contact with Ms. Webb. You are not to come within 500 feet of her home, or her place of business. But the house on Oakwood Drive, Cynthia stammered, is part of the probate assets currently frozen pending a criminal investigation, the judge finished. I am referring the evidence of signature forgery and the audio recording of the assault to the district attorney's office for review. You may be facing felony charges. Ms. Whitaker, I suggest you get your affairs in order. The judge stood up. Court is adjourned. Cynthia did not move. She sat frozen in her pastel suit, a woman who had walked in expecting to charm her way out of a family squabble and was leaving as a suspect in a criminal investigation, homeless and disinherited. I stood up. I did not look at her. She was already in my rearview mirror. Veronica, Elena, and I walked out of the courtroom and into the bright, blinding sun of the Denver afternoon. The air smelled of melting snow and wet earth. It smelled like freedom. It is over, Elena said, closing her briefcase with a satisfying click. The DA will likely pick up the case. She is going to be tied up in criminal defense for years. She won't have time to come after you. Thank you, Elena, I said. Truly. Just doing my job, she smiled. And Carly? Your dad was a smart man. That bad actor clause? Genius. An hour later, Veronica drove me up into the mountains. We did not go to the main estate. We went to the lake house. The drive was quiet, winding through the pines as the elevation climbed. When we pulled into the gravel driveway, the sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in shades of violet and burnt orange. The house stood there, sturdy and cedar-shingled, exactly as my father had built it. We walked up the steps to the wraparound porch. The lake was a sheet of glass, reflecting the mountains perfectly. It was silent, save for the wind in the trees. We stood at the railing, looking out at the water. "He knew," I said softly. "All that time, I thought he was weak. I thought she had brainwashed him. But he knew." "Arthur loved hard," Veronica said, leaning against the post. "But he was a builder. He knew that if the foundation was cracking, you had to reinforce it. He couldn't fight her in his condition. Carly, he was too sick, so he built a wall around you instead." She reached into her purse and pulled out a thick, cream-colored envelope. "Speaking of foundations," Veronica said, "I have one more piece of business." She handed me the envelope. I opened it. It was a legal document, stamped and notarized just yesterday. It was an update to the Blake Family Trust, Aunt Veronica's will. I scanned the pages. My eyes widened. "Veronica," I said, this is everything." "I am not getting any younger," she said, waving her hand dismissively. "And I have seen enough vultures in this family to know that if I do not write it down in blood, they will pick my bones clean. You are the only one, Carly." "The only one?" "The only one who stood up," she said, turning to look at me. Her eyes were fierce and blue, reflecting the lake. "You stood up to her. You stood up to the family. You stood up to me when I was being blind. You have the grit. Carly, you are the only one I trust to carry the name." She pointed to a handwritten note clipped to the back of the document. I read it aloud, my voice trembling in the cold mountain air. "Not because you are my niece, but because you are the only person in this house who dared to refuse to let anyone beat you and steal your life. You broke the cycle. Now, go build something new." I looked up at her, tears streaming down my face, but they were not tears of grief. They were tears of release. The heavy cloak of fear I had worn since Christmas, the fear that I was crazy, that I was alone, that I would die isolated like Cynthia had predicted, slipped off my shoulders and dissolved into the wind. "Thank you," I whispered. "Do not thank me," Veronica said, putting her arm around my shoulders. "Just promise me one thing." "Anything." "Promise me you will change the locks on this place before we drive back to the city." I laughed. It was a genuine, full-throated laugh that echoed across the water. "Deal," I said. We stood there for a long time, watching the sun disappear behind the peaks. Two women standing on the porch of a house that had been fought for, bled for, and finally, won. The nightmare of Christmas Eve was over. The red box was empty. The smartwatch was broken. But the truth was out. And for the first time in a decade, the lake house and my life belonged entirely to me. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I would love to hear your thoughts on Cynthia's downfall. Do you think the punishment fit the crime? Please leave a comment below telling me where you are tuning in from. And do not forget to subscribe to the Lila Revenge Stories channel, like this video, and hit the hype button to help more people hear this story of justice.